Imagine sitting in a room where the future of national security is being discussed, where strategies are drafted and decisions are made that could alter the balance of power across the globe. Now picture one of the seats at that table being occupied not by a general or a senator but by the richest man on earth. No oath of public service, no long career in the armed forces, just vast financial interests and the power to walk into America's most guarded institutions. That image alone should send a chill down your spine, but for Congresswoman Jill Tokuda it was more than a picture. It was reality, and when she questioned Pete Hegseth about Elon Musk's alleged presence at the Pentagon, the mask slipped off.
Billions of dollars of contracts going to his company, and he is, as to your point, was leading Doge, which was involved in cutting hundreds of contracts, but also becoming intimately aware of the platforms and the requirements that would be given out for new contracts. Did you not think it was a conflict of interest to invite someone with financial interests into the Pentagon to have firsthand knowledge of what they could then bid on for their own, enrichment?
Ma'am, it was just an informal discussion, but I'll tell you, anyone that knows our Defense Department knows we show no preference to any company other than what your capabilities are, and we're grateful for the places where his companies benefit our national defense.
So for a $280 million donation, the world's richest man with companies intimately linked and involved in billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense gained access into the Pentagon. So would you say that any company right now that has multi-billion-dollar contracts with the Department of Defense has access to the Pentagon right now? 1-hour briefings with you personally.
On the regular basis,
the answer
I
is
meet with many people and many different companies and many different aspects of our defense industrial base to ensure we have the best possible capabilities. It would be imprudent to do
Well, I'm
otherwise.
sure for an investment of $280 million, Elon's investors are quite happy that it's come out into the billions. I want to jump questions right now. Mr. Secretary, on January 6, 2021, rioters and looters attacked federal law enforcement officials, vandalized and destroyed federal government property, and caused an estimated $2.7 billion in damages right here at the Capitol. Would you have sent the National Guard and the Marines in on that day?
Well, unfortunately, President Trump requested the National Guard in advance, and that was...
It took him quite a long time. I'm asking you, as Secretary of Defense, would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day? We had 140 Capitol Police officers injured. One died the next day. Would you have sent in the National Guard and the Marines?
As I said, President Trump directed National Guard to be there in advance.
And I think you can look at the record of how long it actually took for him to actually send them in. But it's good to hear that it sounds like you would have sent in the National Guard and the Marines on that day in which the insurrection was taking place right here at the Capitol. Mr. Secretary, during your confirmation hearing, you failed to deny the conclusion that you would carry out an order to shoot protesters in the legs. So let me be direct. Given what we are seeing across the country right now, would you carry out or issue an order by the President for our military to fire upon protesters actively engaging in their civil right to exercise free speech, their First Amendment rights? Would you give that order from the President?
I assume you're insinuating what's going on in Los Angeles, and I wouldn't call
Not just
that a
Los
peaceful
Angeles.
protest.
If we take a look at protests throughout the country, it's a simple question. If directed by the President, would you order our military to fire upon protesters? Simple yes or no.
Ma'am, we have, as you know, and as this committee knows, we have standard rules of engagement that are in place that give guidance to our troops, and they abide by them.
I'm asking what you would do. Again, you said you serve at the pleasure of the President. Is that not true?
I do serve at the pleasure.
So if the President told you to shoot people in the legs, would you do so? Now, you failed to answer this question as well in your confirmation hearing when asked by members of the Senate.
Because I refuse to accept a false hypothetical that's attempting to put me in a corner and make it look like a representation.
At a time when we have more Marines and National Guard in Los Angeles than we do in Syria and Iran alone, I don't think this is a hypothetical. This is an actual situation that we are dealing with.
She asked him directly whether Musk had been invited to a Pentagon briefing about war planning with China. A yes or no should have ended it, but instead came a carefully hedged response. No, there weren't war plans, he claimed, but yes, Musk had been invited. That admission wrapped in denial was more telling than a simple answer could ever be. The question wasn't whether Musk had been handed a secret playbook, the question was why he was allowed in the room at all. And as Hegseth dodged responsibility, refusing to say whether it was his decision or the President's, the sense of unease grew sharper. Because Musk is not an ordinary visitor, his companies are intertwined with the Department of Defense in billions of dollars worth of contracts. Rockets, satellites, communications platforms, his fingerprints are everywhere in modern warfare infrastructure. When Tokuda pressed about conflicts of interest, she revealed the real stakes. How can a man who profits directly from defense spending sit in private meetings about future defense strategies without that shaping his advantage? The line between public duty and private gain had blurred into nothing. At one point, Hegseth brushed it off as an informal discussion, insisting that the Pentagon doesn't play favorites, but his defense only reinforced the problem. If the richest man in the world is brought into secret conversations under the excuse that he already has major contracts, then the logic of democracy has been turned upside down. Instead of being excluded for conflicts of interest, the conflict becomes the reason for deeper access. What Tokuda exposed wasn't favoritism, it was capture, a system where influence isn't hidden but normalized, where billionaires can buy their way into the war room. This wasn't just a story about one meeting. It reflected a larger pattern, a merging of corporate power with government decision-making that's quietly reshaping American democracy. The Pentagon justified the presence of a billionaire by pointing to his existing role in national defense, as if being already enmeshed in profit made him indispensable. That's not how a republic should work, that's how a plutocracy operates. And it raised a frightening question: in a system like this, who does the Defense Department really serve, the people or the shareholders? Tokuda's questioning didn't stop there. She pivoted toward the test that would haunt any official's credibility. January 6th. She reminded the room of what happened that day when rioters stormed the Capitol, leaving more than 100 officers injured and billions of dollars in damages. And then she asked what seemed like the simplest of questions: if he had been in charge, would he have deployed the National Guard and the Marines to protect the Capitol? It should have been a moment for clarity, an opportunity to say that defending the nation's legislature against violence is not a matter of politics but of duty. Yet once again Hegseth stumbled. He fell back on excuses about the president's decisions, delays, and official records. He didn't give the answer that mattered. The silence was louder than any denial. In that dodge, the old question returned: is loyalty owed to the Constitution or to whoever holds the highest office at the time? But what followed was far more chilling. Tokuda asked whether he would obey a presidential order to fire upon protesters, ordinary Americans exercising their right to free speech. Not rioters, not insurrectionists, protesters. She cut through the ambiguity and forced a direct moral test. And in that room, every citizen listening should have expected the same unflinching response: never. Never would the U.S. military fire on its own citizens for peacefully protesting. That's not hypothetical, that's the line that separates a free country from authoritarianism. Yet he refused to cross that line. He didn't say no. He didn't pledge loyalty to the Constitution over a hypothetical order. He called it a false scenario meant to trap him. He leaned on rules of engagement rather than principles. In that moment, what was revealed wasn't just hesitation, it was a willingness to leave the door cracked open to the most dangerous possibilities. Because when a military leader cannot immediately reject the idea of firing on civilians, the system's guardrails look far weaker than we want to admit. What Tokuda revealed was not a clash of personalities but a glimpse into how fragile democratic checks can be when authority is tied too closely to politics. The answer to that question was more important than any budget debate or contract discussion, and the fact that it was evaded rather than answered spoke volumes. Even more telling was what happened next. The room moved on, quickly, too quickly. No one followed up, no one demanded clarity. The questioning evaporated, leaving only silence behind. And that silence might be the most frightening part of all, because sometimes democracy doesn't fail in grand dramatic gestures. It fails in the quiet moments, when the questions that matter most are left dangling in the air. That silence revealed the fear that perhaps everyone already knew the answer, and pressing it further would tear open wounds the institution wasn't prepared to confront. The system closed ranks. The question was buried, and the implications slipped under the radar: just another day in a hearing filled with evasions. But it should not be forgotten. A billionaire was allowed into the Pentagon because he already profited from Pentagon contracts. A defense official refused to clearly say he would defend Congress against a mob. And when asked whether he would order troops to fire on peaceful protesters, he didn't reject the idea outright. The silence that followed was not just awkward, it was an alarm bell. This is how erosion works. Democracy doesn't collapse in a single instant with one order or one decision. It decays piece by piece through excuses, evasions and justifications that grow more normalized with every passing year. When billionaires gain secret access to war rooms, when conflicts of interest are reframed as qualifications, when questions about loyalty to the Constitution are dodged rather than answered, the damage is already underway. Tokuda's interrogation wasn't just political theater. It was a mirror held up to the system. What it reflected was unsettling, a defense apparatus entangled with private profit, a political culture hesitant to challenge authority, and a silence that speaks louder than words. It showed how vulnerable even the strongest institutions become when those inside them forget that their first duty is to the people, not to power, not to profit, and not to any one individual. And maybe that is the most important takeaway. The most dangerous threats aren't always foreign adversaries or geopolitical rivals. Sometimes they're the compromises made quietly within, the willingness to blur lines, the refusal to answer questions that should have only one answer. The moment Musk walked into the Pentagon, the line blurred between government and private power. The moment Hegseth dodged about January 6th, the line blurred between defending democracy and defending a man. And the moment he refused to say he would never fire on protesters, the line blurred between constitutional loyalty and authoritarian obedience. When silence replaces accountability, democracy doesn't just weaken, it begins to dissolve. And if there's one lesson from this hearing, it's that the most revealing moments aren't the grand speeches or the fiery exchanges, they're the questions that hang in the air unanswered, because the truth they point to is too unsettling to confront. So where does that leave us? In a place where vigilance is no longer optional, because if billionaires can buy their way into military briefings, if officials can dodge questions about defending the Constitution, and if the most chilling scenarios are met with silence, then the erosion is already happening. The only safeguard left is awareness, citizens refusing to let those silences go unchallenged. That's why this moment matters, not because it will be replayed on endless loops, but because it might otherwise vanish in the noise of political spectacle. It was a warning, one that should not be ignored, because democracy doesn't vanish in a single day. It disappears in the moments no one is watching. So what do you think? When the country's most powerful institutions allow private wealth to mingle with public power, when loyalty to office outweighs loyalty to principle, and when silence shields the most dangerous questions, are we seeing democracy defended or democracy sold? Drop your thoughts below, and if you want to keep uncovering stories that cut through the evasions, hit that subscribe button. The next chapter will go even deeper.